Why, hello there. Please, come in from the rain. Put your jacket on the coat rack. Have yourself a nice cup of hot tea. I made it fresh for you. Welcome everybody to another episode of Rainy Day Reading. In case you haven't been able to tell, unfortunately Walt could not make it today, which was a little disappointing, so I'm taking over for this particular session. And joining me, of course, is the infamous Brit, Tama. How are you doing today, sir?
I am fine. Infamous Brit, really?
Yes.
Is this what I am now, the infamous Brit?
You're the only Brit on the site.
Yes.
I think.
Well, the infamous part, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So today's particular podcast episode of Rainy Day Reading will be focusing on a manga from, I believe it's Asano?
Yep.
It's called What a Wonderful World, but which we'll just say right now is a really interesting manga, and we'll get into why. But before we do that, I guess it's time for that usual segment of what are we reading. So I'll start with Tama. What are you reading this fine time, I guess to say?
I am currently reading Aya Kano's Requiem of the Rose King, and I may have mentioned this a few episodes ago, but I am still reading it because we've now got volumes 3 and 4, and it's got better, it's got more Shakespearean. Aya Kano's artwork is still really nice, and generally it's a really good series. I mean, I say this as a sort of an aside, but obviously the Aya Kano, who also did the series Skip Beat, which has obviously had the really, really successful kickstart at the moment, and it's sort of really nice to see that her work is sort of getting a wider audience outside of Japan at the moment.
Yeah. I remember you had mentioned that you wanted to try and write a review of I think it was the manga.
Yeah.
On Infinite Rainy Day, and that didn't actually end up panning out.
It's not panned out at the moment because I've only just been catching up to it, and it is sort of it's one of those series that because it is licensed, it is nigh impossible to find online, which I suppose is a good thing because then you're not sort of having the issue of piracy. But on the other hand, it does make, catching up to it when it's not being sort of serialized in volume form is a little bit difficult, it's a little bit problematic, because it's sort of, well, you have to wait, with sort of most mangas, you're having to wait either a week or a month, but when you are relying on it being serialized, you're
Right.
waiting 3-4 months for another 6 chapters to appear and be translated, whereas sort of with non-licensed series, you can pretty much sort of keep up with it days after Japan. So I mean, it's one. The thing is, I generally feel about sort of licensed series is it's great and it's brilliant that they're getting money, but there needs to be, and I think there are with certain publishers.
Yeah.
They're obviously now sort of releasing it online pretty much as anime is increasingly done. In other words, sort of close to Japan, if not simultaneous with Japan. So that is why I haven't managed to catch up with reviewing it yet, unfortunately.
Yeah. For those who don't know, one of the jobs that I have as assistant editor on Infinite Rainy Day is if you have an article that's really old and nobody's been touching it for months, in order to save up space, I delete it.
Yeah, he's the master of the pokey stick, and I am getting the pokey stick a lot of the time at the moment.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna have to, as of right now, they're still finishing up winter seasonals. I'm gonna have to delete the individual blogs because they're taking up too much space from the main winter seasonal post that Dark always puts up.
This is the grubby nitty gritty, everyone.
Yeah. It's practical to delete them though, so I'm not complaining. Although it does make me look like a bad guy when I'm deleting something that somebody comes and tells me an hour and a half later I wasn't done on that.
This is why what you should do is just sort of copy the text, put it in a Word document, and they go, oh well, actually I saved it on a Word document.
Yeah, but I guess yeah. But speaking of Requiem for the Rose Dream, and you mentioned how it's hard to find, it could have been a much more frustrating position, which I'm glad isn't right now, which leads to what I am discussing. And I'm sure people who have been following me on Twitter know this, but about a month ago, I bought the entire complete collection of Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. The Viz Media, I think it was 2011 release. It's the giant one that weighs like 8 pounds.
I have seen the thing in person now in Oxford, and it is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. It's basically, it's too huge. I mean, we're talking bigger than the Attack. Is it big? I think it's bigger than the Attack on Titan collected ones.
I don't know.
I think they're about the same size as the sort of the colossal Titan editions of Attack on Titan. They're in a really, really nice slipcase, but they are really expensive. But God, it's beautifully presented.
Yeah, and because it's 2 different volumes, and because the volumes are huge, I've only read the first one. So the second one is still on reserve. So if I'm ever called back for another podcast, I might talk about the second one, and I might actually end up reviewing the full thing when I'm done reading it on Infinite Rainy Day. But it's the first volume is 548 pages. It's the first 5 chapters of the book. And it's interesting because Miyazaki kind of started writing this before he made the movie, and he finished it right after, I think, Porco Rosso came out. So it was about 13, 14 years. And it was a passion project, and you can tell by reading it, and it goes into so much depth. Like, to put it in perspective, the movie covers a chapter and a half of the book. The first chapter of the book is like the first 60% of the film, with a few differences here and there. And then the second half, the remaining 40% is like the first half of chapter 2. So it ends right around the time when the Omu invade the Valley of the Wind. So it's pretty much like 80%, 85% the same up until that point, and then they diverge, and then you go into this giant war with another tribe called the Dorok, and there's the Vai Emperor, and you get into all these really complicated politics. Like, Kushana has different brothers and a father that she's competing with for attention, and then there's this weird, gross subplot involving Omu eggs that are edible, and there's a girl named Cachette who is like one of the Dorok priest's servants who barely speaks like a broken version of Nausicaa's language, and it's like a really big war epic on par with Lord of the Rings. Like, I think for as much as I love the movie, I think that if this book were remade now into a film, it could be on par with Lord of the Rings.
Oh, definitely.
And like, I think that it'd probably be great for now, because where the war epics are this big trend right now, and you have environmentalism going on, and I think that the cast pretty much speaks for itself because it's like predominantly Caucasian. You have Nausicaa could easily be done by like a Chloe Moretz type of person, or an Ellie Fanning, or someone like that. And I remember when I mentioned this to Tama, he said that Kushana should be played by Uma Thurman. But I don't think that Uma Thurman would be good for a live-action portrayal. So I think that maybe you should probably go with like a Scarlett Johansson or something like that. I don't know, I'm just spitballing out there.
It is definitely. I'd almost say the thing is, due to the length of it, I'd say it was probably better for a mini series or even a full series, because I think it's actually almost too long to make a single film out of.
No, I mean like a trilogy.
Oh, definitely, yeah, sort of.
Like 3 2.5 hour movies would probably be good.
Yeah, I could see that quite happily.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff in the book that's repetitive and a lot of backtracking that you can probably cut out, but it's not impossible. I mean, Peter Jackson managed to turn the 3 Lord of the Rings books into 3 successful movies. I don't see why someone along his lines could easily do that.
Just don't make it The Hobbit.
Just don't make the what?
Don't make it The Hobbit.
Oh yeah, don't make it The Hobbit. Well, I would be upset if you made 3 movies this time with this book. And then one other thing to note is that the art is absolutely gorgeous. Like, there are plenty of panels where you just see environmental shots, and they are friggin' beautiful to look at, which is great because the chapters are really long. Like, the first chapter is 134 pages, and the first half of the book ends on a cliffhanger, as all good stories do. But yeah, I remember I was describing this to my family, and they said one of them clearly said it was a passion project, because nobody spends 14 years on a manga and breaks it up to do other work without it being a passion project.
Definitely not. I mean, there are 2 points I'm going to add to this. First off, basically, in order to get the funding for Nausicaa, I think basically Miyazaki had to basically create an almost a proof of concept, which is actually essentially what the manga became. Obviously, it extends far beyond what the film is, but it essentially started as a manga to promote and to actually sort of gain interest for the film, and then obviously carries on beyond it. The other, and the particularly interesting thing, considering general techniques for drawing manga, is the entire thing is done in pencil.
Yeah.
Which is impressive generally, but to sort of actually see it in a manga of that length is really impressive. I believe the technique he uses essentially, he did everything in pencil, photocopied it and darkened it. So in other words, it doesn't obviously it looks more like an ink produced work than a pencil produced work.
Yeah. And this was done back when computers weren't being used, so it's even more impressive. And while we're on that, actually, another thing I wanted to talk about is a book. And I've read it 3 times, or I'm in the middle of reading it the 3rd time. It's called I think it's called Studio Ghibli: The Films of Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata. It's pretty much an anthology piece. And it's like these 2 different people, Colin O'Dell and Michel LeBlanc, who are freelance writers for Camera Books, Kamera. They wrote their little snippets on the films of the studio, going back as early as Miyazaki and Takahata's Toei days, and going all the way up to Ponyo. So it's obviously a little out of date, and it reads like a self-published work because the paragraphs are a little long, and there are some syntax issues here and there, and it almost reads a little bit unprofessional at times. But it's organic, it's interesting, and it's definitely worth checking out as a curiosity piece. If you're ever a Studio Ghibli fan and want to learn more about the studio. And I thought that it was interesting to just point it out, because the manga that I was reading was a Studio Ghibli type of manga, and this is a Studio Ghibli type of book. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that sounds very interesting.
Yeah. And the cover is a picture of Totoro, Satsuki, and Mei.
I think I might have actually read that. Is that a Rough Guides one by any chance?
So the back says that it examines all their major works, exploring the cultural and thematic threads that bind these films together.
Interesting.
And it has a list of all the stuff, the keywords on the back flap. It's great because the book has built-in bookmark flaps, even though it's soft cover. So you could easily bookmark your spot without folding the pages in, because Lord knows people who fold pages in are monsters.
Yes, definitely. That we can agree on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's kind of what I've been reading.
Cool.
Which I guess leads us to our main topic at hand.
Which is It's a Wonderful World by Inyo
Asano.
Asano.
Yeah. I'll say this right now. Inyo Asano, kind of just reading the book, reminds me I don't know if you've heard of him. His name is Jeff Lemire.
I haven't heard of him, I'm afraid. What would you say is the sort of the similarity?
Well, he wrote a book called Essex County, which is about these, I think, 3 or 4 stories, short stories about life in, I think, Montreal, Quebec. And the underlying theme is about hockey because Jeff Lemire is a huge hockey fan, I think. And it kind of paints the characters much like It's a Wonderful World as being depressed and gloomy and full of tragedy, and there's a lot of bitter angst there, but there's a beautiful melancholic sweetness to it. The only difference is... What?
I can definitely see the similarity in what you said, because I mean, they definitely do have both works. I mean, I'm not obviously familiar with the other work you're talking about, but they both do see that this work does seem to be very melancholic and very introspective.
Yeah, and it's not as long as It's a Wonderful World. It's like I said, 3 or 4 stories, but it's definitely an interesting piece. And the way in which they tie all 4 of the stories together at the end is also kind of tragic. But yeah, I thought it was an interesting little piece. By the way, Jeff Lemire also does work from Marvel Comics and DC Comics. So that's why, if you look up his resume, you'll find more of his stuff. But yeah, I read that book in my graphic novel class in university, so that's why it came to mind. But anyway, back to It's a Wonderful World. It's a Wonderful World is 19 short stories dealing with different people's lives in Japan. And I think there's a thematic bind at the end. I'm not involving a dog, right?
Yeah.
A dog that's in, I think, almost all the stories. And who looks like a cat, by the way.
I thought of about 3 or 4 stories until they literally say it's a dog. I thought that's a cat. There's a cat in this, okay. And it's like, oh, it's a dog. Yeah.
So this one's kind of hard to really describe the 19 stories, but I'll pick a few that stood out, and you can probably Tom can pick a few that stood out too. Yeah, that's good. I hope Walt forgives us, but the first one that stood out for me is the very first story about a recluse college dropout who's a tomboy, and she's just struggling to make it through the day with her pet turtle. Her neighbor is obnoxious and loud and threatens to kill her turtle and to destroy her room. She has friends that used to work with her in a band. She wants to get in touch with her feminine side. She's an obsessive compulsive smoker. Actually, a lot of these stories have people who smoke in them and drink.
I think that might be just generally a Japanese thing. I mean, Japan, like, there is like 1 in 4 people in Japan smoke. So it's I mean, it's a cultural thing that I don't think you see in anime much, but it's sort of the reaction to people smoking, particularly to sort of reaction to young people smoking, is sort of less than it is probably in the Western world.
Yeah. And then there was one story about these 2 guys who find this cough syrup addicted junkie named Syrup who just wants to be able to fly. And at the end of the story, he does fly because he gets hit by a train and dies. And that one stood out for me because, like, the entire time I looked at it, I read it, and I was thinking to myself, this guy does not need to be encouraged. He needs help. You're calling the guy Syrup. He's addicted to cough syrup. He wants to fly. He constantly passes out from, like, hangovers, I think. He looks hungover. He clearly needs help. He's clearly suicidal. And then there was one that also stood out about this father who writes for a porno magazine who just wants to write he wants to save up for his daughter's birthday, There was one about a guy who's resisting merit, I think it was. There was one about a girl who makes a deal with a Shinigami to become a doll. There are a lot of really interesting little short stories. I can't say I remember all of them, unfortunately, but there were definitely some interesting ones. And I think a few of them have direct thematic connections through different characters from one story going to another story. Right?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I mean, there are characters who sort of turn up in the background. There are sort of shared locations. It's the main thing that it reminds me of, for my part, is the work of Haruki Murakami, who's a Japanese novelist who sort of deals with sort of very strange people in strange situations. I mean, particularly the first story with the turtle. It's sort of very normal up until the sort of the stinger at the end, and it's sort of, oh well, this is a bit sort of strange and this is a little bit unusual, and it's particularly that first story that gave me this sort of Haruki Murakami-esque feel. But as a general whole, it does share Murakami's sort of idea of sort of people in strange places, people doing, essentially breaking out of their comfort zones. Essentially the sort of the issues with Japanese society, and sort of a sense of almost of unhappiness and discontent, which is sort of, it obviously grows throughout the sort of the 2 volumes of It's a Wonderful World, to a sort of to the point, to obviously leading up to the ending of the series.
So there's also one that I forgot to mention that stood out for me as well, about a girl who's held at gunpoint by a guy dressed up as a teddy bear.
Oh yeah, that one was particularly, I thought. I would agree with you as to those are probably the best stories. The other one I thought was particularly striking was the one with the bully.
Which one with the bully?
The boy who is essentially part of the sort of a leader of a gang, and they are essentially getting away with, well, not murder, but close to murder.
I don't remember that one. It's funny, I read this over a week and I don't remember that one. I remember there was one where they were trying to break a guy's arm.
I'm trying to remember if that's the same one. I mean the issue I have with this, and probably you're going to agree with me, is there are 6 or 7 or potentially 8 very, very good stories in this. And then a lot of them very much seem to blend into one. It's sort of there are standout points of it.
Yeah.
And there are, I mean, some of the linking pieces, almost the linking chapters are very good, but there's almost a sense of quality over quantity. It's sort of going very much over the same sort of territory and sort of saying the same things multiple times over in different situations.
Yeah. You know what it reminds me of, if I were to compare it to film? You know those anthology films that the anthology films that have these, they have thematic links, but the stories are not connected, like Paris Je T'aime or Brooklyn Stories or package films. They're like package films.
Yeah. Yeah, I can get I can get the sort of where you're coming from with that. It is very much sort of, you get a number of stories on a theme. It's basically a graphic series of short stories, some of which link, some of which don't.
Yeah. I actually said on Twitter, and this got retweeted by 2 different bot accounts. It's A Wonderful World, aka 19 short stories about the miserable nature of life itself.
Yeah. Some of them are miserable. I mean, so the one with the girl the guy who goes back to his band with, I think it may be the girl from the first chapter.
Yeah.
I mean, that was quite a hopeful. I mean, some of them are upbeat and some of them are sort of thing, but then again, you get the sort of the sting in the tail of that one. Is then you meet a member who was in their band later on, and the band are actually really miserable, and they're basically now a musical product. They're a band. Their songs are being written for them. This isn't what they basically set out to do.
Yeah. I will also say, like, I'm actually not sure. There isn't a lot I can really say about this book as a whole. I will say that the art style is actually surprisingly restrained. I remember we had done one on X Day, which is about these poor people who are planning on blowing up a school because they're suffering from depression. By the way, Walt, if you end up hearing this, I did send that to the Israeli person I told you about, and he hasn't read it yet. But there I mentioned that the art style was kind of restrained. I think this one's even more restrained. I think the art style type is called Gakija, or Keji or something like that, which is a photorealistic style of animation. The character expressions are very restrained. They're expressive, but they're restrained, and there isn't any real iconography going on in the stories. It's nice. I honestly think this is one of those manga that could be adapted into a live action anthology series.
That I would definitely agree with. I mean, it has Asano generally in their work have a very sort of a cinematic style. I mean, this is typical of their work. I mean, obviously it's not as out there as Goodnight Pun Pun, which is also by Asano, which is a far more hallucinogenic and far more sort of visually interesting style. I mean, in Goodnight Pun Pun, he's using sort of photographs, he's using other pieces of imagery. But this is a very restrained style. The only thing I have against Asano's style is it's very difficult to age up any character under about 30. Because I mean his character's basically from sort of teenager or sort of 15-year-old upwards to about 30. Basically, he uses the same face design. The other thing I have slightly against his style, obviously, I mean, I can understand from a homogenous society like Japan, and given that sort of an idea of and the concept of the thing is sort of depression and the sort of the being forced to fit into essentially the cultural model that a lot of Japanese people are forced to fit in, of the hard-working salary man who sort of goes out to work, comes back, feeds his family, his wife stays at home. I mean, obviously that is a key theme throughout, because a lot of the characters are either trying to escape the rat run or are sort of damaged or disaffected, because I mean you have the Ronin, the people who are sort of students but are not managed to get into college for a particular year, who are sort of very disaffected. I mean, that's typified by the character of Syrup, who's pretty much a dropout. He's sort of towards the bottom end of society, and it's sort of interesting that Asano ends the story of Syrup sort of in such a way, you know, that he ends, you know, doing what he said he wanted to do, albeit in a rather dark and twisted sort of version of what he set out to do.
Yeah. There's also one part that I think there's only one part that kind of confused me when I think one of the characters who was living with one of the stories that one of the characters living with his girlfriend, and they had mentioned he'd mentioned that he wanted to drop out of his job to go start a band. His girlfriend looks at him, they grab hands, and then they say something like hands forward, and they switch places. I did not get that cue at all. It didn't make sense.
I didn't get that either.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, unfortunately I think that's very much lost in translation.
Yeah, and I guess overall, the manga is interesting. It like I said, it reminded me of Jeff Lemire's Essex County, and that it's very straightforward. What you see is what you get. There's not a lot of fluff to it. It's definitely tragic in some ways, melancholic in others. It connects at the end, I think, through the dog. There's also an owl there too at some points. And I would recommend it, but I don't think I would call it amazing.
I'm very much of the same opinion. I think it's a good manga. Asano's style, I think, frankly, a lot of what Asano does is sort of, you know, you should read this if only once, because he has got a very interesting view on sort of style. His style is probably one of the most distinctive and one of the most impressive I've seen from sort of an artist who isn't the guys who did Death Note for a while. And generally, thematically, okay, some of the short stories are a little bit shaky, some of the short stories are punch way above their weight. But as a general work, I think it's a good work. It's also, I actually looked it up on Amazon because I am intending to buy it after this review. It's actually also a point for an Asano work, considering how expensive the omnibus versions of Goodnight Pum-Pum is. It's actually a pretty cheap series to get hold of, so I mean that's a recommendation in itself.
And it's also very much a product of its time too. What year did this come out? Because there are like landlines and old-fashioned cash registers.
I think it's sort of early 2000s, because when it was published for the first time, I think Viz published it more recently. It was published by Tokyo Pop, which should age it sort of to before, I think, 2010, 2011. I think it's early 2000s.
Probably.
Yeah.
And then I think it's also funny, the site that I read it on, often had, when it was loading a page, a picture of a cat running up the screen, that I thought was really interesting. I thought that was like the most entertaining part of the entire story. Not to slight the manga itself, but that was the most entertaining part of reading it.
It is a, I wouldn't say it's a difficult read. It's
not a difficult read at all. It's a very easy read.
It's very for most of the work. I mean, obviously the sort of the guy who takes the girl hostage is a very loud thing. The bike one, where they're, in other words, they're sort of racing downhill to sort of decide his present, that's fairly out. But the surprising amount is, apart from occasional sort of jump moments where there's sort of there's a sort of almost a visual jump scare. It's actually a surprisingly quiet series.
Yeah, and it's also a really easy read. Like I said, it's 19 chapters, but the chapters are like anywhere from about 10 to 33 pages each, and it goes by really fast. I couldn't read it all at once because I had other things I had to do in between, but I managed to finish it in about a week. And if I had done it straight, I probably could have finished it in about a day.
Yeah, it's not a terrible. I mean, 19 chapters sounds really intimidating. I don't think it's over 300 pages.
Yeah. Okay. So that's, I guess, about it. So we both recommend it, even if only once. And that's about it. I think the storm is starting to clear up a little bit. Hopefully you enjoyed your tea. If you're British, you probably enjoyed your tea with a little bit of milk. And we'll see you next time for when the storm starts again. Hopefully this time Walt will be with you. I don't know if I'll be back for a while, but if I am, you'll hear from me again. So see you later.
Bye.